1. The geography that defines power. The South China Sea lies in the western Pacific Ocean, stretching from the Strait of Malacca in the southwest to the Taiwan Strait in the northeast. Surrounded by China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines, and Indonesia, it covers nearly 3.5 million square kilometers, larger than the Mediterranean. This sea is dotted with hundreds of small islands, reefs, atolls, and shoals, many submerged during high tide. The most famous groups are Spratly Islands, Nansha Qingdao; Paracel Islands, Xisha Qingdao; Pratas Islands, Dongsha Qingdao; Scarborough Shoal, Huangyan Dao; Macclesfield Bank, Zhongsha Qingdao. Each of these features is tiny, but their strategic and economic significance is enormous. Whoever controls them can claim the surrounding exclusive economic zone, EEZ, extending 200 nautical miles, rich in oil, gas, fish, and trade routes. The sea connects major global shipping routes, linking East Asia with the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. About $3 trillion worth of trade passes through its waters every year. This includes vital energy supplies to Japan, South Korea, and China. Hence, the South China Sea is not just water. It is a lifeline of global commerce and a chessboard of power. 2. The hidden treasure beneath the waves. Beneath the calm blue surface lies an estimated 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. The sea also supports one of the world's richest fishing grounds, providing livelihoods for over 3.5 million people. For China, with its massive population and growing energy needs, this is a strategic necessity. For smaller states like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, it is economic survival. But the problem is simple. Almost everyone claims a part of it, and many of those claims overlap. 3. The web of competing claims. China claims almost the entire sea, enclosed within its famous 9-dash line. This sweeping U-shaped boundary first appeared on maps in 1947 and covers about 90% of the sea. China argues that it has historic rights, citing ancient naval expeditions, trade routes, and historical maps from the Han and Ming dynasties. Vietnam claims sovereignty over the Paracel and Spratly Islands, citing records from the 17th century when Vietnamese emperors exercised control. Philippines. The Philippines bases its claim on proximity and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. It asserts control over the Calayan Island Group, part of the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal. Malaysia claims southern portions of the Spratlys, again based on EEZ entitlements under UNCLOS. Brunei's claim is the smallest, limited to its EEZ, but still overlaps with the Spratlys. Taiwan, officially the Republic of China, also claims nearly the entire sea, using the same 9-dash line as mainland China. Thus, 6 claimants, each with their own logic, maps, and evidence. But the sea cannot be divided 6 ways without conflict. 4. Colonial roots and historical foundations. The seeds of the modern conflict were planted during colonial rule. In the 19th century, France controlled Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, while Spain ruled the Philippines. When oil exploration began in the 20th century, these colonial powers claimed nearby reefs and islands for themselves. After World War II, Japan occupied many islands in the sea. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the San Francisco Peace Treaty, 1951, required it to renounce control, but did not clearly state who would inherit them. This created a vacuum of sovereignty, and the stage was set for post-war claims. 5. The birth of the 9-dash line. In 1947, the Republic of China drew an 11-dash line around most of the sea. After 1949, when the People's Republic of China was founded, the line was redrawn with 9 dashes, omitting 2 near the Gulf of Tonkin. This line has no exact coordinates, just vague dashes, yet it is treated by Beijing as a historical boundary. Critics argue that the line violates UNCLOS, which limits territorial claims to 200 nautical miles from the coast. 6. The Law of the Sea, Rules versus Reality. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1982, defines coastal rights. 12 nautical miles of territorial sea. 200 nautical mile EEZ. Sovereignty over island that can sustain human habitation. But if a rock or reef is submerged at high tide, it cannot generate an EEZ. Most of the South China Sea features are tiny rocks or reefs incapable of supporting permanent life, meaning they don't qualify for large EEZs. Still, China and others have built artificial islands, installing runways, radar systems, and missiles, turning reefs into military fortresses. 7. The strategic value. Beyond resources, the South China Sea is crucial for military and trade routes. About 30% of global shipping passes through it, carrying oil, gas, and goods between Asia and the rest of the world. For the United States, freedom of navigation in these waters is vital, not only for trade, but also to prevent any single power from dominating Asia. For China, the sea represents its southern gateway, key to national defense and access to deep-sea waters for its navy. Beijing views foreign patrols as provocations near its coast. Hence, the sea is both a commercial artery and a strategic flashpoint. 8. The rise of China's maritime power. In the 1990s and 2000s, as China's economy soared, so did its naval ambitions. China began expanding its navy plan, constructing aircraft carriers, submarines, and coastal bases. By 2013, Beijing launched a massive program of land reclamation, dredging sand to build islands atop reefs like Fiery Cross Reef, Subai Reef, and Mischief Reef. Satellite images revealed airstrips, radar domes, hangars, and missile launchers. China called these outposts defensive in nature. Others saw them as attempts to control the entire sea. 9. The Philippines versus China, the 2016 arbitration case. In 2013, the Philippines filed a case against China in The Hague under UNCLOS. The tribunal ruled in 2016 that China's 9-dash line has no legal basis. None of the Spratly features can generate a full EEZ. China violated the Philippines' sovereign rights by interfering in its EEZ. China rejected the verdict, calling it null and void, while other countries supported the ruling. This judgment became a cornerstone for international law, yet enforcement remains impossible without consensus. 10. Escalating military presence. Since 2016, tensions have escalated. The U.S. Navy conducts freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, sailing near Chinese-held islands to challenge excessive claims. China responds with military escorts and radio warnings. Meanwhile, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines continue to build small outposts or send patrols. In 2020-2024, new incidents occurred. Chinese vessels ramming Filipino fishing boats. Laser blinding of Coast Guard ships. Massive militia fleets surrounding disputed reefs. 11. Environmental costs. The conflict has also devastated the marine ecosystem. Dredging for artificial islands destroyed coral reefs, the rainforests of the sea. Scientists estimate that over 160 square kilometers of coral habitat have been lost. Dynamite and cyanide fishing, common in disputed zones, further worsen the damage. Hence, beyond politics, the South China Sea faces an ecological crisis. 12. The human dimension. Fishermen are the frontline victims. Thousands of small boats from the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia depend on these waters. When coast guards or naval forces clash, these civilians face danger. Many families have lost livelihoods, and some nations now deploy fishermen as maritime militia, blurring lines between civilian and military. 13. Attempts at peace. Since 2002, China and ASEAN have discussed a code of conduct to prevent escalation. However, progress remains slow. Each country interprets sovereignty differently. Occasional bilateral talks ease tensions, but mistrust runs deep. The absence of a clear enforcement mechanism keeps the region volatile. 14. The broader context. The South China Sea is part of a larger picture of U.S.-China rivalry. While China sees the sea as its natural sphere of influence, the U.S. views it as part of international waters. Other powers, Japan, Australia, India, the UK, and the EU, also support freedom of navigation. Thus, a regional dispute has become a global concern. 15. Summary of Part 1. The South China Sea's geography makes it uniquely strategic. Its natural resources and trade routes make it invaluable. Overlapping claims by 6 nations ensure tension. China's 9-line conflicts with international law. Military buildup and environmental destruction continue. In essence, the South China Sea represents the intersection of geography, energy, nationalism, and global power. 16. The modern geopolitical chessboard. The South China Sea today is not just a regional issue. It's a global stage where the world's major powers test each other's resolve. The key players are China, rising superpower, seeking regional dominance. United States, defending freedom of navigation and its allies. ASEAN countries, caught between cooperation and confrontation. External powers, Japan, India, Australia, and the European Union, all concerned about stability. This delicate balance defines the modern Indo-Pacific order. 17. China's strategy, Blue Water Dream. China's long-term vision is to transform itself from a coastal defense power into a blue water navy, capable of operating globally. Its construction of artificial islands and bases is part of this strategy. By militarizing the Spratlys and Parasols, China can extend its naval reach into the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Monitor shipping routes. Control access to the Malacca Strait, a vital energy choke point. Secure energy imports and trade routes for its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. China calls this its Maritime Silk Road, linking ports from Southeast Asia to Africa and Europe. From Beijing's perspective, Western powers once dominated Asian seas. Now it's China's time to reclaim its maritime destiny. However, to its neighbors, this looks like expansionism. 18. The U.S. response, free and open Indo-Pacific. The United States considers the South China Sea a test of international law. Since World War II, the U.S. Navy has guaranteed freedom of navigation through all major sea routes. Washington argues that no nation should control international waters or restrict passage. Under this policy, the U.S. conducts regular freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, sending warships near Chinese-claimed reefs. Aircraft carriers like the USS Ronald Reagan and USS Nimitz frequently patrol the region. The U.S. also strengthens alliances. Japan and South Korea through defense treaties. Australia and India via the Quad Alliance. Philippines through the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, allowing U.S. access to bases. These actions signal a clear message. The U.S. will not allow unilateral control of the South China Sea. 19. The role of ASEAN nations. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, including Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei and the Philippines, faces a dilemma. On one hand, they want peace and economic ties with China, their biggest trading partner. On the other, they fear losing sovereignty over their waters. ASEAN's unity is often tested. Vietnam and the Philippines push for stronger action against China. Cambodia and Laos, closely tied to Beijing, prefer silence. This internal division makes it hard for ASEAN to adopt a united stance. Still, ASEAN continues to negotiate with China on a Code of Conduct (COC), a framework for managing disputes. Though slow, it represents hope for diplomacy. 20. Japan, India, and Australia join in. Beyond the direct claimants, regional powers are increasingly active. Japan depends on the South China Sea for energy imports. Tokyo provides Coast Guard ships and maritime radar systems to countries like the Philippines and Vietnam. Japan also participates in joint naval exercises with the US and Australia. India promotes the concept of a free Indo-Pacific and conducts naval patrols through the Malacca Strait. Through its Act East policy, India supports Southeast Asian nations' sovereignty and has increased defense cooperation with Vietnam. Australia, heavily reliant on open sea lanes for trade, views any restriction in the South China Sea as a threat. It regularly joins joint maritime exercises such as RIMPAC in Malabar, showing solidarity with allies. These powers collectively balance China's growing influence, a maritime coalition in all but name. 21. Economic dimensions of the conflict. The South China Sea's importance is not only military, it's profoundly economic. $3.5 trillion in annual trade flows through its routes. It's a main conduit for crude oil and liquefied natural gas, LNG, from the Middle East to East Asia. Global manufacturing supply chains, electronics, automobiles, and consumer goods rely on its shipping lanes. A blockade or conflict here would send shockwaves through the global economy, disrupting fuel supplies and shipping insurance rates. China's control would also allow it to influence or restrict trade, strengthening its geopolitical leverage. This is why many countries, even those far away, watch the situation closely. 22. Military buildup and the Great Wall of Sand. The U.S. Department of Defense famously called China's artificial islands a Great Wall of Sand. Satellite imagery shows airstrips over 3 km long for fighter jets and bombers. Missile systems capable of targeting ships and aircraft. Radar and communication towers covering vast maritime zones. Harbors deep enough for large naval vessels. China claims these facilities are for defense and rescue, but in practice, they extend its A2AD anti-access area denial capabilities, meaning it could prevent foreign forces from entering the region during conflict. Meanwhile, the US, Japan, and Australia respond with more joint drills, reconnaissance flights, and defense agreements. The region has become one of the most heavily militarized maritime zones in the world. 23. The Gray Zone Strategy. China often avoids direct conflict and instead operates in the gray zone, actions that are coercive but below the threshold of war. Examples include deploying maritime militia disguised as fishing fleets, using Coast Guard ships to block or ram foreign vessels, building infrastructure gradually on reefs before other countries can respond. This allows China to expand control without firing a shot, a slow, persistent form of territorial change. Other countries, especially the Philippines and Vietnam, struggle to respond without escalating into open war. 24. The Philippines and the U.S. renewed alliance. After years of fluctuating policy, the Philippines has returned to a strong partnership with the United States. In 2023, Manila granted U.S. access to 4 additional military bases under EDCA. These sites are strategically positioned facing the South China Sea and Taiwan. The Philippines has also resumed joint patrols with the U.S. and Australia, asserting its right to operate within its exclusive economic zone. However, China continues to challenge these actions, resulting in water cannon incidents, laser attacks, and near collisions. The conflict remains tense but contained, a war of intimidation and resilience. 25. Vietnam's quiet resistance. Vietnam, though smaller, has one of the region's most determined strategies. It has fortified its own outposts, expanded runways, and enhanced its coastal defense missile systems. Vietnamese fishermen and coast guards regularly face confrontations with Chinese vessels, yet the government maintains a careful balance, resisting China but avoiding full confrontation. Vietnam also deepens partnerships with the U.S., Japan, and India, building a network of diplomatic and defense support. 26. The role of international law. The 2016 Hague Tribunal ruling remains the most important legal precedent. Though unenforced, it shaped the global understanding that China's historical claims lack legal standing. Artificial islands don't create sovereignty. The Philippines and other nations have legal EEZ rights. This ruling gives smaller nations moral and diplomatic strength, a foundation for future negotiations. Countries like Japan, Australia, and the EU openly support the ruling. Even India and the UK reference it in maritime policies. Yet, without enforcement mechanisms, law remains weaker than power in these waters. 27. Information warfare and diplomacy. The battle is not only on sea, but also in narratives. China invests heavily in media campaigns, research institutes, and international conferences to justify its claims historically and legally. It presents itself as a peaceful power, defending its territory. On the other side, the U.S. and allies use public diplomacy, highlighting the value of international law and freedom of navigation. This information war shapes global public opinion, influencing neutral countries and investors. 28. Environmental and humanitarian impact. Beyond geopolitics, the sea's ecosystem is collapsing. Coral reefs, vital nurseries for marine life, have been destroyed by dredging for island construction, overfishing and dynamite fishing, oil exploration. Scientists warn that if trends continue, fish stocks could collapse by 2045, endangering regional food security. Meanwhile, small fishing communities face harassment, poverty, and loss of livelihood. Thus, a conflict born of nationalism has become a human and environmental tragedy. 29. The risk of accidental war. The South China Sea is full of naval and air patrols from multiple countries. With dozens of warships, fighter jets, and coast guards operating close together, the risk of accidental collision or miscommunication is high. Even a single incident, like a ship collision or radar lock, could spiral into a larger confrontation. The 2001 EP-3 incident, when a U.S. spy plane collided with a Chinese fighter near Hainan Island, serves as a warning. Both nations managed to defuse it then, but future leaders may not be as restrained. 30. The role of technology and intelligence. Modern surveillance satellites, drones, and underwater sensors now monitor the South China Sea constantly. China uses AI-based maritime tracking, while the U.S. relies on space-based reconnaissance. Electronic warfare, cyber intrusions, and GPS jamming have become tools of modern competition. This digital dimension adds a new layer, information dominance, where controlling data equals controlling the sea. 31. Global economic and political repercussions. The South China Sea affects not only Asia, but the entire global economy. A disruption would spike oil prices. Insurance rates for shipping would soar. Global supply chains could freeze. Politically, it defines the world's multipolar order. How this conflict evolves will determine whether the 21st century is peacefully shared or divided by rivalry. 32. Possible futures. Experts envision several scenarios. A peaceful management. China and ASEAN agree on a binding code of conduct. Joint exploration and resource sharing replace confrontation. This would require mutual trust, still a distant dream but possible. B. Cold confrontation. The current pattern continues: patrols, protests, and diplomatic statements, but no full war. This is the most likely scenario in the short term. C. Limited military clash. A collision or incident sparks a localized skirmish. Diplomacy intervenes before escalation, but relations sour further. D. Major power conflict. In the worst case, U.S. and Chinese forces clash, dragging allies into war. The economic and human cost would be catastrophic, reshaping global politics forever. 33. The symbolism of the sea. The South China Sea has become more than geography. It's a symbol of national pride, power, and identity. For China, it's about reclaiming historical dignity. For smaller nations, it's about defending sovereignty. For the United States and its allies, it's about preserving a rules-based world order. Thus, beneath its blue waters lies the struggle over what kind of future the world will have, one ruled by power or by law. 34. Lessons from history. History shows that maritime dominance has always shaped world power, from the British Empire to American hegemony. Now, China's maritime rise challenges that balance. But history also warns that unrestrained competition at sea can lead to conflict, as seen before both world wars. The South China Sea could either become a corridor of cooperation or a trigger of global crisis. The choice rests on diplomacy, restraint, and shared responsibility. 35. The future of cooperation. Despite tensions, there are sparks of hope. Regional search and rescue exercises between navies. Joint environmental research and fisheries management. ASEAN's continuing diplomatic engagement with China. Technological collaboration, academic exchanges, and people-to-people diplomacy could slowly transform rivalry into coexistence. Peace will depend on communication, mutual respect, and a shared understanding that no nation can thrive alone in an interconnected sea. 36. Final reflection: why it matters. The South China Sea matters because it embodies the challenges of our time. Competing nationalism versus international law. Economic interdependence versus military rivalry. Environmental fragility versus political ambition. Its fate will influence the stability of Asia, the security of world trade, the balance of power in the 21st century. Whether it becomes a sea of conflict or a sea of cooperation will define the story of our generation. 37. Conclusion. The South China Sea is not just a place, it's a mirror of humanity's ambitions and fears. A place where geography meets destiny. Here, tiny reefs decide the course of empires, and fishermen's nets cross invisible lines drawn by politicians. It reminds us that peace is fragile, law is vital, and cooperation is the only path forward. If nations can share this sea, respecting law, protecting nature, and valuing life, it could become a model for global harmony. But if pride and power prevail, its waters may turn from blue to red.